Funerals are once again being held for Palestinians killed in Israeli airstrikes in Gaza after the IDF launched what it says is a massive offensive against terrorist organizations. It is the biggest such operation in Gaza since the ceasefire began on the 19th of January. Gaza's health ministry says at least 326 people have now been killed, with a number of people still under the rubble. The United Nations human rights chief says he's horrified by the airstrikes, which will add tragedy onto tragedy. The Israeli military has now issued evacuation orders for a number of neighborhoods in Gaza. And the extent of these strikes did seem to take many by surprise, particularly during this month of Ramadan. So let's bring in our Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran. Now he's outside the Israeli Knesset in Jerusalem. Matt, good to have you with us on the program. Now we can see that there is a demonstration that's happening behind you. What's happening there?
Girish, good evening to you. There's a small but quite noisy protest happening here outside the Israeli Knesset. Not only the Knesset, but the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office. Sorry, just someone walking through the shop there. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office is actually just behind us as well. And that's why this group have come out here to protest. They are saying they are very angry at these strikes, saying that they put the lives of the hostages still held in Gaza at further risk. That they are jeopardising those who are still alive. There are 59 hostages in Gaza. 24 of them are still believed to be alive. And this is really indicative of ongoing criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. The accusations being that he is putting fighting ahead of the welfare of these hostages, that he is simply trying to shore up his own political fortunes here in Israel, because there are some very loud members of his parliament, of his coalition government rather, who are demanding a return to the fighting.
Yes, and what can you tell us about the latest of the situation in Gaza? How damaging have these strikes been?
It looks like the full extent of it is still becoming clear because, of course, these strikes happened in the middle of the night, local time. And as more people are waking up and seeing the devastation, we are seeing more people arriving at hospitals across the strip trying to get whatever treatment they can. Many people also reportedly still stuck under rubble in whatever buildings they were sheltering in, those buildings, the ones that are still standing after 16 months of war. As you mentioned in your introduction, the death toll has already exceeded 320, and that does seem to continue to rise. We are hearing reports that senior Hamas officials are among the dead, but the civilian toll is also incredibly high. We have seen some shocking vision coming out of Gaza of particularly young children being rushed into hospitals, small lifeless bodies being held by parents as they try to get treatment for their children. Many of them, it's simply too late for that. So the full extent of that is becoming clear. What we also know is that the IDF has issued new evacuation orders for a number of communities along that Israel-Gaza border, trying to expand the buffer zone between Israel and those communities in Gaza. There has been this buffer zone operating for some time, but it looks like the Israel Defense Forces are trying to now expand that, make it even deeper, pushing deeper into Gaza's territory there. And those evacuation orders are displacing many thousands more people as the reverberations of these strikes continue to be felt right across the area.
Matt, were there any signs earlier on that Israel would be launching its biggest strike since the ceasefire was put in place?
We have been describing this ceasefire as fragile for some time, but these strikes certainly did take everyone by surprise. Apart from the United States. The United States did get advance warning of these strikes happening, and the White House was informed ahead of those strikes being launched. It does appear, however, that there's been some maybe indications, some suggestions in the last couple of weeks or so that Israel was preparing to restart fighting. The new head of the Israel Defense Forces had said that 2025 would continue to be a year of fighting. We heard over the weekend the US Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff, when he was commenting on the US strikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen, he said that that should also serve as a warning to Hamas about the tolerance that the United States has for terrorist activity in Gaza, a suggestion that any delays in the ceasefire process would also impact Hamas in Gaza. That may well have given Israel the green light to launch these attacks. We know that the IDF had been planning this ever since last week. They presented these plans to the Netanyahu government for approval, and that approval was given, hence those strikes happening in the very early hours of this morning.
So the big question is, Matt, is this ceasefire effectively been broken?
Well, it certainly seems odd to be talking about whether or not a ceasefire is still in force when we've seen such huge strikes wrought across Gaza by the IDF. But technically the ceasefire is still in force. What will affect that is what happens from here, what sort of reaction we see from Hamas in particular. They have issued a number of statements condemning these attacks, calling on the international community to do so as well, to pressure Israel to stop its aggression there, calling on the UN to intervene, things like that. But also how the region also responds. We're already hearing some reaction from the Arab world. Egypt, one of the mediators in this dispute between, in this war between Israel and Hamas, saying that effectively this is a bad move. It is a setback for peace, but also noting that this is something that that only Israel has the power to control there. Whether or not the ceasefire holds, yes, we will have to see whether or not there are further strikes in the coming hours, in the coming days. But technically, it does appear to still be in force, even though there is this horrific death toll coming out of Gaza after these large strikes launched by Israel.
And speaking of these strikes, Benjamin Netanyahu says that these were in response to slow progress on extending the ceasefire. So why have the talks failed so far?
Well, the talks haven't even really gotten off the ground. They were meant to begin many, many weeks ago, some 16 days into that initial 6-week ceasefire. They never did. They were constantly delayed and derailed, and then the initial 6-week ceasefire lapsed a fortnight ago, and that seemed to be when attention turned to the so-called Phase 2 talks, what would happen after that initial 6-week ceasefire. But they have yielded no fruit so far. They have not seen, there's not been any progress towards a lasting peace in Gaza. And that is why there is this concern there about how this process is going forward, whether or not a Phase 2 deal is feasible or achievable in any way there. We know that Israel has put forward proposals to extend the ceasefire through to April in exchange for more Israeli hostages being released. That is something that Hamas has rejected, saying it's simply pushing this process down the line. It's Israel avoiding negotiations on a lasting peace. Hamas has also put forward proposals to release a couple more hostages, but that has been rejected by Israel. So both sides are criticising each other for the delays here, and that is why we've got to this stalled process and why there is very, very little movement. But Israel, in launching these strikes, is putting all of the blame on Hamas there, although it doesn't appear that that's necessarily the fairest outcome, the fairest accusation to be levelling.
Okay, Matthew Doran in Jerusalem, thank you so much.